Hello and welcome back. It's me, Valerie Monroe. And me, Bookwormy. We're so glad you're here to read with us today. We've been reading the book, Journey to Nagwanis. And if you remember, yesterday, Finley decided that he can't go to Nagwanis without his red cap. And he told Brogdon that his red cap is what makes him become invisible if needed. So let's see what happens. Remember, the skunk currently has the red cap, so this could be kind of a stinky adventure. Chapter 8. As anticipated, the skunk was still pacing back and forth near the compass rose sign, and just as they had suspected, Finley's cap was perched like a tiny teepee on top of his black and white head. Finley snuck up behind a small rock and observed the skunk for several moments. He and Brogdon had come up with a few options. The first involved Finley startling the skunk so that the cap toppled off his head. The second required Finley to chuck a tiny stone at the cap so it fell off. While Finley was waiting to set one of the plans into motion, two girl skunks strolled up. They watched the skunk guard as he marched back and forth and then put their heads together, pointing and giggling. Hearing them, the skunk guard whirled around. "Hey, Raimundo," one of the females called out. "What you doing?" "Coco, you know I'm working," he replied, "and you aren't supposed to be bothering me." And as serious as he tried to sound, Raimundo's eyes were nevertheless drawn to the other skunk, who wore a pink bow in her fur. "I know," Coco said, "but Jasmine wanted to see you." "No, I didn't," Jasmine giggled, poking Coco in the side. "Yes, you did. You said you thought that my brother was cute." Coco then erupted into a fit of giggles. "Coco, you're embarrassing me," Jasmine scolded, giggling as well. "Come on, let's get going." Raimundo marched up to them and extended his paw to Jasmine. "You can call me Ray, Jasmine. It's a pleasure to meet you. Unfortunately, I am unable to talk while I'm on duty." Coco stepped in, shoving a lunch pail between the two. "Listen, Ray," she said teasingly, "Mama sent you some earthworms and millipedes to snack on. She told me to remind you to come right home after work. No running out with your friends." Okay, he retorted, clearly embarrassed. "So see you later, Raimundo," Coco called out, and then the two girl skunks ran off laughing together. Raimundo stopped marching and took a minute to admire his glossy fur, his fine stripe, his bushy tail, and his very husky build. He glanced around to see if anyone was watching him before he began digging into the snacks. His doting mother had been generous with portions, as the lunch pail was chock full of wiggling treats. He began stuffing one worm after another into his mouth. When he could eat no more, he patted his belly and let out a large belch. Then he snuggled up against a rock and drifted off to sleep. Finley crept out from behind the rock and began crawling on his hands and knees. Just as he was about to climb the rock that Raimundo was leaning on, the skunk began talking in his sleep. "Oh, what a stinker I am," he murmured. "What a smelly smell I spray. How odorous, how aromatic." Finley froze in his tracks, and it took several minutes for Raimundo to settle down. When the skunk began to snore deeply, Finley scrambled up the rock, reached for the cap, whisked it off, and plopped it on top of his head. He became instantly invisible, which was lucky because the skunk woke up at that very moment. "What? Who? Where?" Raimundo whirled around and searched for whomever had disturbed his slumber. However, the amount of food he had consumed had taken its toll. Seeing no one, his eyelids drooped and he was out again in seconds. Finley raced off in order to outrun any spray that might be coming up behind him. He didn't stop until he reached the shore, where Brogdon and Che were waiting on the raft. He took a flying leap and landed next to Brogdon, causing the raft to rock wildly from side to side. Because Finley was still invisible, Brogdon had no idea what had happened, and he let out a terrified scream. The moment Finley removed his cap, Twirling it around on his finger, he became visible again, and a smile spread across his bearded face. Brogden hollered, "You scared the life out of me." "Scared the life out of me," repeated Shay. Ignoring this, Finley let out a whoop and a laugh. "Mission completed," he proclaimed triumphantly. "And now, let us go forth and deliver the Amber Rose." And here is probably what Finley looks like now. As much will you have time for another chapter today. This one's called Ambush. As much as Brogden wanted to stay angry with Finley for startling him, the sight of the gnome, so happy to be reunited with his magic cap, banished any such ideas. Besides, there were more important things to talk about. There were only a few remaining hours until dawn, and they wanted to travel as far as possible under the cover of darkness. "My map was washed away down the swale," Finley said, "but I have the directions to Nagwanis committed to memory. Keep on the lookout for a large, gnarly tree with a rope swing, the kind that house-dweller children use to fling themselves into the lake. Once we spy that tree, we will dock the raft on the shore nearby. 10 feet due north of the gnarly tree is a large cluster of boulders. We'll have to walk amongst them until we feel it." Now, boulders are large, large rocks. "Feel what?" asked Brogden. "Air." "Air? Air!" Che exclaimed. Finley nodded. "Yes, indeed. Cool, moving air. There will be a hole in the ground, and a breeze will be flowing upward from within. We will have to feel around with it for our hands. Might be a little tricky. There is the possibility that dirt, leaves, or rocks could be clogging it. On one hand, that is a good thing, because it keeps the curious from finding it and going in. On the other hand, it makes extra work for us. Once we locate it, we'll clear it out and then head down to Nagwanis," said Finley. "Head down? What do you mean, head down?" inquired Brogden. "The only way to reach Nagwanis is through an underground tunnel," Finley explained. "We will have to descend close to 100 feet and then begin another climb upward. And once that's done, we can deliver the Amber Rose and be on our way home." The raft continued to drift along the shore with Che flying beside it. Brogden could sense from the way Che's wings were drooping that the poor bird was tiring. So he was pleased when they rounded the corner and the darkened silhouette of a large, gnarly tree with a rope swing came into view. "There it is," Finley said, pointing. "Let's dock here." The raft creaked and bumped as it landed against the land. Brogden hopped off and pulled it out of the water while Finley untied Che. "Well, my good and faithful friend," Finley said to Che, "I'm sure you want to be moving along." But the green parrot did not fly off. "Che," the gnome began again, "you've gone above and beyond the call of duty. Without your strong wings pulling the raft, we would never have made our escape from Six Raven Island. Brogden and I love your company, we most certainly do. But we also know that you are someone's pet. You must be. Someone is waiting for your cage door open, hoping and praying for your safe return. We don't want to hold you up. It's time for you to head home." But still Che did not fly away. "I don't think Che wants to leave just yet," Brogden said. "Don't want to leave just yet," repeated Che. "Of course you're welcome to stay if you like," smiled Finley. "Is that what you want?" "That's what I want," Che said. "Wonderful," Finley replied with a single nod, putting the matter to rest once and for all. They began moving toward the gnarly tree, but had only gone a short distance when Che began pecking Brogden's shoulders. "Hey, cut that out, Che, that hurts." Che stopped pecking Brogden and began pecking Finley instead. "Che, knock it off," yelled Finley. "What in the world is wrong with you?" And at that moment, a blood-curdling scream, "Ah!" ripped through the air. Finley jumped into Brogden's arms. At the same time, Brogden jumped into Che's winged embrace. Can you picture that? A gnome jumps into a foot's arms, and the foot jumps into the bird's arms. And then the three of them toppled over and lay on the ground quivering. What was that?" Finley whispered. Probably just an owl," Brogden replied, and the scream came again. Ah! This time louder and closer. It sounded like a woman. Goosebumps popped out all over Brogden's arms, and Che's feathers stuck out in disarray. That's the same scream I heard when I was being carried off by the raven, squeaked Brogden. I'm sure of it. Sticking around here could land us in big trouble. We need to get out of here. Nonsense, Finley said. I have to complete the delivery. I must. And if you won't go with me, I'll do it on my own. Before Brogden could say, why don't we wait a minute and think this through? Finley stomped off with the amber rose tucked under his arm, muttering something about people being cowards. He strode past the gnarly tree in the direction of the clump of boulders and disappeared into the darkness. Brogden turned to Che and said, this is a terrible idea. Terrible idea, repeated Che. If only he would listen to reason. We could have waited till morning. Why does he have to be so pig-headed, so... Another scream cut through the night air. It was louder than ever, and so close that Brogden whirled around, fully expecting to see someone next to them. We can't let Finley go by himself, Brogden exclaimed, his voice still quite unsteady. Adrenaline was rushing through his body, and there was a tingling excitement that made his tiny heart feel as though it was going to jump out of his chest. He grabbed Che and ran toward the boulders. Finley! Brogden called out in all directions. Wait for us. He couldn't believe how quickly the gnome had disappeared. Finley! When they reached the first of the large gray rocks, Che wriggled free and hopped onto Brogden's shoulder. They searched all over for Finley, but there was no sign of him. And there was a new sound now, a sort of snuffling and grunting that seemed to be coming from inside clumps of tall grasses that grew between the rocks. Brogden refused to look for the source of the noises, even though it felt like someone or something could be on their trail. He quickened his pace and focused on locating the cool air that Finley claimed would be near the opening to Nagwanis. And just then, a shower of pebbles rained down on them. They hit Brogden's arms and legs, and an especially large rock walloped him on the side of his head. He fell to the ground and crawled to the nearest boulder, crouching behind it for protection. The assault continued for several minutes. Che wrapped his wings around Brogden while keeping his head and beak tucked down. Several long minutes passed before the pelting stopped. When Brogden emerged from under Che's wing, a small trickle of blood was dripping down his cheek, and he felt a bit woozy when he got to his feet. Curiously, he peered all around, but there didn't seem to be anyone else in sight. And then came the welcoming sound of a familiar voice. Brogden! Che! Finley, Brogden exclaimed. Psst! Over here! You can't see me, and I don't dare show myself. I can feel the cool air, and I think the entrance is very close, but I'm afraid to come out. Something really bizarre is going on. I'll say so with those rocks being thrown at them. I know, Brogden cried back. Che and I were just showered with rocks. I saw, Finley replied, and someone threw a huge tree branch at me. Are you okay? Yes, but I'm afraid to move. Afraid to move, repeated Che. Then don't, Brogden told him. Just stay where you are. They all remained still, waiting and listening. Something or someone was rooting around near them, but they couldn't see what it was. Whatever it was, it sounded extremely agitated. Twigs and branches snapped. Grunts and snorts punctuated the air. And twice more there were bone-chilling shrieks which set Brogden's nerves on end. Finley, are you still there? Brogden called out. Silence. Finley? Brogden waited, but there was no response. He leaned on Che's wing and peered out from behind the boulder, but saw no one. Then he left Che and raced frantically from boulder to boulder until he had reached the one where he was sure Finley's voice had come from before. And as soon as he got there, he knew he was right, because Finley's red cap was lying on the ground, but heading away from it in the dirt were the largest footprints Brogden had ever seen in his life. And that's where we'll stop for today. What happened to Finley? I'm not sure. I'm a little worried about him. I don't know who those big footprints are. Who made those big footprints? I know. The only way you can find out is to join us tomorrow and read more of Journey to Nagwanis. Thank you for joining us today, and see you tomorrow.